Go, Linda, knock it out of the park. Everyone, welcome to Hampton Roads .NET. I'm Kevin. That's depending on, I don't know how the screen's oriented. That's Drew. And that's Linda. So hi, everybody. We're just going to let Linda talk because she's going to drop some knowledge on Azure Static Web Apps, one of my new favorite tools on the Azure Stack. And if you have any questions at all, drop them in the Twitch chat and we'll get to them eventually. But sit back, relax. Go, Linda.
All right. I'm going to share my screen. And all right. Kevin, can you see my slides?
Yep, you're good.
All right, awesome. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about making over your website with Azure Static Web Apps. I felt like there was already kind of a lot of content out there, like tutorials. Like John Papa has a really great tutorial on Azure Static Web Apps. So I kind of approached this from the thought of like, I know everyone has all these little gems hidden in GitHub, and we don't know where they're all hosted. Some are on Heroku, maybe some are on Azure App Service, or Google App Engine or something, and they're maybe costing you some money, or you just want the opportunity to modernize them, and maybe it's just a little bit hard because you just don't know what state they're in. So I'm just kind of giving you the opportunity to kind of go ahead and push them to a modern platform, and then kind of show you how you could sort of start modernizing a little bit. And I'm saying modernization, but modernization is just another way to say makeover. We're making over your sites just like we would in a makeover movie, because everyone loves a makeover. So yeah, what about your janky old websites? Because I know you have a lot of them. I have a lot of them. There were some that were only like maybe 5 years old even, that were really super cool, and React was just coming out, or whatever other framework was just coming out, and now I don't know where they're hosted. I have them all over the place. So I think I wanted to tackle some of those, and maybe even just go through and delete some of the really terrible ones and modernize some of the ones that I care about a little bit. So go through your GitHub, find a website you care about, and we're going to make it over. So let's talk about Azure Static Web Apps. And so for this conversation today, I'm kind of assuming that everyone sort of knows what Azure is. It's Microsoft's cloud platform. If you're used to AWS or GCP, it's our equivalent essentially of that. And we have pretty similar services. I think AWS has some version of an Azure Static Web Service that I don't know what it is, but probably does something fairly similar. But this just went into public preview at Microsoft Build. You could always make static web apps on Azure, but it just took a little bit more work, really. You could use Azure App Service, and then you could deploy to your static assets to storage. And there's just like a little bit more wiring that you had to do. It wasn't quite as magical as this, and there was also a little bit of cost involved. So the setup was always there. We've just made it a lot easier. And right now it's free. There's an asterisk there because once you start connecting databases like Cosmos DB and things like that, it becomes a little unfree. And maybe eventually the whole service won't be as free as it is now. But for right now, it's free. And just kind of historically, static web apps are just very inexpensive. So I think it will stay somewhat near free. Everything JavaScript from top to bottom. So if you're a JavaScript fan, every time I do talks for HR Nug, I seem to not ever talk about .NET. So I'm going to just continue that, even though I work at Microsoft. And serverless APIs too. So on Azure, serverless APIs usually means Azure Functions in some way, because that's our functions as a service. It's a building block of serverless apps on Azure. And so it becomes kind of the, backing, the dynamic part, I guess, of Azure Static Web Apps. There's also a lot of authentication integration. So you can integrate your, Twitter login and GitHub login and all that. There's a lot of, I'm not going to demonstrate that today, but it's kind of all in the docs. And then the CI/CD is with GitHub Actions. So they're really banking on GitHub and GitHub Actions with this. Most of the talks that I've seen about static web apps, people ask almost initially like, okay, well, what about Azure DevOps and Azure Pipelines? And right now it doesn't support. Really, like, it's just GitHub Actions is really like the backbone of the CI/CD for this. But really, GitHub Actions are Azure Pipelines under the hood. They all have, it's all essentially the same kind of code that operates both. So anyway, it is pretty similar. Okay, so just like assuming that you don't know what a static web app is, essentially, yeah, it's just HTML, JavaScript, CSS. It's a very decoupled architecture. So we're not talking about server-side rendering here. We're talking about, all of your static assets, your HTML, JavaScript, CSS are in the front end, and they are static assets completely separate from a dynamic API in the back end. Cheaper, it's faster because everything's already compiled and ready for the browser to render. It's like storing things in storage with especially a serverless backend. No matter what cloud platform you're using, fast is generally pretty inexpensive. So if you're not storing a bunch of code, like let's say, in some sort of PaaS tool, then it's just going to be a lot cheaper all around. High availability. I mean, you've got a lot of that, like global access essentially once you're pushing your static assets to storage too. And so really, I mean, not only are they going to be faster, but really, like, we're talking about global availability there. Easier deployments, especially if you're using static web apps, but just generally too. I mean, if you're using something like React, let's say, you're going to have a build step where your code gets built to static assets and minimized and everything like that anyway. And so it's then easy from there to just deploy that somewhere where a browser can render it. And also, Jamstack is cool. So, right now static web apps are pretty hipster cool. Some of that is that, front end developers like to do front end. They like to focus on front end. And so when you have these kind of decoupled architectures, it allows front end people to do what they do and not have to really worry about APIs and infrastructure and deployments. And it allows sort of back end people to do what they do and just sort of connect in the middle, making all these hand gestures, but like they're down here. So this is kind of like your standard serverless web app. And AWS has a diagram that's really similar to this. And this is kind of a pattern that a lot of people use for web apps. And this is kind of like the before Azure Static Web Apps, where like you're using the CDN and it's a completely separate service. And it says API management here. But like the function app, Cosmos DB, the single page web application, like the concept is still pretty similar. We're still using the same pattern. We're just kind of using a service that's going to bundle it all together for us. And so here's our like super, super complex web apps diagram, which is pretty easy. I mean, basically you just connect it to your GitHub repo. So it is dependent on GitHub. And then your action is just going to fire off anytime you commit anything to master. And then, it's just going to build everything for you. If you have APIs, then it will build the Azure functions for you. If you don't have APIs, it'll just build the static content. It will give you URL link, poof, you're done. So that's much easier than having to kind of set up your own build process. It's interesting. I was doing a talk on Azure pipelines, like sort of pre-pandemic, I think like January, February. And someone was asking me how they would set up. It was actually in AWS though. They were asking me like, okay, how do I, compile and deploy a static, like a static site essentially using Azure pipelines. And we set it up, but it wasn't like completely out of the box like this. So that's pretty cool. But there are some constraints. I originally had limitations on this slide, but then I was reading like through the docs and it said constraints in there. So I thought I should use the same wording there, but yeah, I mean, it's still in preview. So, things are being added constantly. The cool thing is that right after build, I was playing around with this and I put together sort of an internal presentation for my team. And I had a slide similar to this. And so when I was kind of moving content around, I realized that some of the constraints had changed or were totally gone just from then until now. For instance, it did not support bindings in Azure Functions initially, and now it does. It does only support HTTP triggers, which kind of makes sense because it's a web app. And so you're going to have, like your static app hitting your back end. So that part kind of makes sense. I know people might want to have some other functions in that API that are called by other services. So you kind of have everything together. But for right now, that's the only trigger for your functions. No API management. So the way that routing kind of works, you have a routes.json file in your application. And actually, I can show that here. And so it looks something like this. And so you can set up your routes. And this is kind of, if anybody's sort of like OG Azure Functions, this is sort of like proxies, which is kind of how we traditionally kind of did APIs with functions. But now really the kind of supported method, if you're really setting up a robust API, is typically using our API management service. For like these simple web apps, a proxy is fine, a routes file is fine. I mean, we're just talking about usually a few APIs. When you get to something that's a little more complex, though, you kind of want API management. But I've seen that question asked. I haven't personally asked the product team. I think that kind of integration is coming. So yeah, I'll talk about some examples and then we'll do a demo. So now's the time to sort of pray to the demo gods. But yeah, so here's like my example Janky Web App. So I had the mullet stack, which was sort of like my little 5 minutes of GitHub fame, 7 years ago or so, where I had front end and back end. The front end was React, which was pretty new at the time. The back end was Happy.js, which was just an API layer. But I intentionally really kept mullet very decoupled because I liked this idea of someone learning both technologies, the Facebook in the front and the Walmart in the back, kind of separately and sort of building on either. So I thought this became a really good example of something I could update with Azure Static Web Apps because, Happy is kind of on its way out. It's becoming deprecated. So, really I don't think anyone's really trying to learn Happy new. So I kind of like the idea of maybe the back end of mullet. I mean, mullet's going to stay mullet, but maybe the new mullet, the backend is Azure Functions or it's Lambdas or it's something more serverless. But the front end stays React. And I don't want to relearn React. I want to keep React the way it is. So I really did not want to have to update React very much, even to like a newer version. Didn't really want to update Webpack. So I kind of went through the challenges of, okay, what would I need to do to make this work with Azure Static Web Apps to get this published? And then from that point on, I could work on APIs. And so I came up with mullet with Jam, which was kind of my end result of this experiment, which is here on GitHub if you want to look at it. So I've got an API layer now that just has like some greetings it cycles through. This is super simple. This is kind of the result of it. I'm also using a custom domain here too, which you can set up with Azure Static Web Apps. And it just like cycles through different greetings. This is not complex at all. But there were a few things that I did kind of have to run through with this. Like, for instance, like I needed to figure out where my build artifact folder was. There was a lot of magic that was going on in mullet with Webpack. So I had to kind of figure out like, okay, where is everything being built to? I had some old versions of Node that were in my package JSON. So I had to go through my package JSON and like kind of tidy it up, like, make sure that it was ready for Node 12, that, I could, if I did like a npm, run build, that it actually did the build. And that's kind of the default there too. If you go to this URL that I have here at the bottom, the docs actually have a list of like tons of different front end frameworks, not just the most popular ones. And it will show you what command it's expecting and what build artifact folder it thinks that you probably are using for that, or like what's kind of the standard if you're just kind of like setting up some skeleton projects in those front end frameworks. So I really kind of like that. That was helpful for me. I had to update my build script a little bit. And then of course I added some serverless APIs with Azure Functions, which I'll show in just a minute, kind of when I do some demoing. But overall, I think I watched some build presentations earlier in the day, and then, you know, I kind of had this already made over by the evening. So it was pretty easy. Once you publish the code and your GitHub action is running, you can kind of watch the build happen, and then you can see where maybe there's some problems. It doesn't understand certain things. And so, yeah, I just have some screenshots, which we'll go through anyway, but, you know, you just go through the basic screens of like entering in all your information. On the right, these are parameters that are going to be in your GitHub action, like your application, like the root, API location. You know, that folder name can be anything. The root of your API always is still API. I guess that's kind of still a constraint, but and then your app artifact location, which mine is public, which is pretty standard. And then, you know, you point to the repository, you hit go, and then it deploys your application. And then once it's done building, your makeover is complete. So I'm going to go through and kind of make over a website. So my very first website was called Linda's 80s site. It was Linda's 80s site.freeservers.com. And so basically in the late 90s, I went to the library, I got an HTML book, I learned HTML. And when I was like in high school, kind of going into college, I decided that I wanted a, you know, homepage, and I wanted this like site that was dedicated to the 80s. And you know, it was mostly lost. Like even if you go back to the Wayback Machine, like you can't really find it now. I know there was a lot of like marquees and music playing and everything, but I did have some old floppy disks with the web page on them. Unfortunately, like a lot of them didn't work, but I bought a floppy drive for my laptop that hooks up to USB, and I pulled a bunch of data off these old floppies. I still have some zip disks, and I still am like kind of hoping that maybe the rest of the site is on the zip disks. But for right now, I kind of just have the homepage and like part of the 80s site. So what I did was I pushed the code to GitHub here, Linda's 80s site. It looks very bad. I didn't change any of the content. So the content is just as embarrassing as it ever was. We're gonna experience it live soon. A couple changes. One thing is index.html was actually like home.htm, and it was all in caps. I learned with Azure Static Web Apps that this is kind of funny. Like it doesn't even like all caps index.html. Like you have to like really behave with your root file there. So I did have to change that. I left these like tildes in here. I was fine with that. I think I had to fix a couple links, but mostly though, like I left all the bad in there. So yeah, I'm not afraid. Just gonna do it. So these are some other static web apps. Mullet is Mullet with Jam. I also made Mullet the original, which is just like the sort of the API less Mullet essentially with just like the small changes that I had to make. So now they're both deployed. I originally had Mullet up on app service, so I was paying some like not free amount for them, and so now they're free. Vanilla Cake is just some sort of demo thing, who knows? It's a vanilla website. Do demos. So I'm just putting it in a resource group. We're gonna stick with the theme of Linda's 80s site. We're sort of limited on the regions for right now for Azure Static Web Apps, but I think it has most of like, you know, the super regions in there. We're gonna sign in with GitHub. Okay. And so, yeah, you just point it to your repository here, which I have way too many repositories. Your master branch. This is actually, I think, new here. This I haven't seen this field before. Interesting. All right. Well, anyway, I'm gonna leave this, but it looks like it just has some presets in there, so it sort of knows what your what sort of application you have. This site is, of course, as static as it gets. It's like OG static, so I think I can just leave that blank. All right, and we're gonna review and create, and I'm gonna hit create. It's going to initialize. So what it's doing now is it's actually, since I authorized GitHub, it went to my GitHub repo. That was super fast. Wow, that's awesome. It goes to the GitHub repo and it actually creates your workflow file. So if I go to, all right, Zoom, I need this room here. I think maybe I can just go to resource. Sorry, watch me struggle with Zoom here. There we go. All right, so here's Linda's 80 site. You can see 1 minute ago that the Azure Static Web App CI did a commit. Here's my workflow file for Witty Pebble, which is what it named my instance there. And then it put all this in here. And then here's the app location. Here's the API. Here's the artifact location. I probably need to change this to also be a slash. I'm not totally sure about that, but I feel like I probably usually put slash in there. I guess we'll see if it does not build. And this is what it puts in here. Now, if you're not familiar with GitHub Actions, what it's doing is this runs on a push to master, and also pull request to master. There's another kind of cool feature that's pretty new, which is kind of something that Heroku has had for a while, where if you do a pull request to this repository, it gives you sort of like a I'm trying to think what I want to call it, like a trial site, like a test site, basically, so that you can see what it's going to look like before you pull the pull request in. So that's a really cool feature. But you can change these here too. Like if you don't want this to build every time you pull into master or something, or you would like it to execute at different times, you can kind of tweak that a little bit too. So you have a little bit of flexibility there. And I'm going to move some Zoom stuff around again. Here we go. There we go. All right. So now I'm back in the portal. And now we should be able to, actually, let's go back to the site real quick. Here. One thing we want to look at is the action itself here. So it looks like it passed. And I'm just in this actions tab in GitHub. And these are all the jobs that were in that YAML file that I just showed you. The build and deploy job is sort of where the magic happens. But you can kind of look through here, like it's saying API could not be found because I don't have an API in there yet, even though when I created this, I said that my API folder was called API. It's not there. It knows that. It's cool. It keeps going. It doesn't know what language is in the repo because the language is old 90s HTML. And here's the rest of the build, and then it completes. And if there's any other problems in here too, like a capitalized index.html, it will let you know. Let's go back here. Kevin, do I have any questions before I do the reveal of this awful website?
Nope, you're good at the moment.
All right, cool. All right, let's go to Witty Pebble. All right, so here's Linda's homepage, which has my very opinionated things from the 90s. I really liked Jaromir Jagr. My email address was Linda Jagr with a space. I did not know that AOL let you have spaces in emails. Anybody else that's old and like knows that that could happen? I hated Puff Daddy, who's now P. Diddy. I think he's fine now. I don't know why I hated him so much, but I did. And a link to the 80s. So anyway, I had created all these like top 10s. I thought I remember these all having colored backgrounds, but maybe that got lost in sort of the translation. But these are all, not in order of importance, the songs that I thought were the best, the mid 80s, and then the late 80s. And then there's the forgotten 80s. Whoa, that background. I think I still like most of these songs, actually. Love Cats is really good. Okay, and then back to the homepage. So this is now Linda's 80s site hosted on Azure Static Web Apps. I have, it's alive again. I do own Linda's 80s .site, so I'll set up a custom domain later. But for the rest of this demo, let's go over to VS Code. And this is where things could really go badly. But I have my Static Web Apps folder open in VS Code, and there is a Static Web Apps extension. I think the last time I used this, it was kind of in preview, so I don't really have any experience with it, so I'm not going to use it today. That's why I kind of created it in the portal. And here is Linda's 80 site, and I've got a couple of the other ones here. I have my font sort of big, and I've got an API folder here locally because I knew I was going to do something with functions later. But I'll first do a get pull. Sorry, I've got, again, to put the Zoom stuff somewhere else. Okay, there we go. Okay, and so now I have my workflow stuff that's in here. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I need a slash there. Maybe not because it already built, but okay. And here's my API location, which is where I'm going to put my Azure functions. And so one of the things I kind of cheated with a little bit was I went ahead, just because my typing while live is just terrible. It looks like I'm typing with 2 fingers or something for some reason when I'm presenting. So I just commented out. But basically what we're going to do is add a message from the future from Azure Functions to Linda's 80 site. So I'm going to uncomment out this. And so the ID here is called message, and then it's just going to put this message from the future right here where these 3 dots are. Make sure my HTML looks okay there, I guess. It can't be any worse. Look at the space in the email. I can't believe that. All right, and here's my script, which is just me fetching this Azure function. Like I said, they all start with API. It's just a thing with Azure Static Web Apps that you have to kind of live with, but you can customize this message here. And I'll do that once I actually create the function. So this is going to fetch a function that doesn't exist yet, basically. I'm really struggling with this Zoom toolbar. I don't know what to do with it. All right, Zoom toolbar. How about you go over here? Okay, cool. All right, and then I'm going to use the Azure extension for, here we go. That's API management. Is this functions? Yes, this functions. Okay, I kind of increased the font here, so now everything looks different. So this is the Azure Functions extension for VS Code. I really like this. I use it a lot. You could just use a CLI. You could just use the Azure portal and create functions. A lot of what I'm doing right now is in the Azure Docs in one of the walkthroughs. Even the code that I just put in index.html, I just kind of used something very, very similar to what's in the tutorial. What I'm going to do is add a function app. Zoom toolbar, why do you hate me? All right. It's just going to go somewhere over here. Kevin, what do you do when you're sharing in Zoom? Like, what do you do with this toolbar that's just in the way of everything?
You should be able to move it, like click and drag it.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. When I'm like pausing and you're seeing my mouse move around, I'm just awkwardly moving this toolbar that keeps getting in my way. All right. So what does AD say? API. So it's going to turn this API folder into an Azure Functions app, JavaScript, HTML trigger, get message. I'm going to use anonymous. We're not going to worry about auth for this. Sometimes with the extension, I'm not going to lie, it sometimes puts my function apps in weird places. I don't know why, but this time it looks like it's going to behave. But basically, though, it generates the scaffolding of your both your function and the function app. So if you're not familiar with Azure Functions, a function app is a collection of functions that are all kind of deployed together as a group. And it used to be that they could be separate runtimes, but not anymore. Now they all kind of have to use the same runtime. So if you want to have, Python functions and JavaScript functions, they need to be separate function apps. And just a pro tip, like don't make a giant function app, because ultimately it's serverless, but there are servers behind it. And if you're doing something super CPU intensive and you just have like 100 functions in a function app, they're all deployed together and they're all maybe like on the same VM somewhere, like things are just going to go bad, especially if you've got like code in there. Just keep things small bits, small chunks. So the host.json, local settings.json is kind of where you can keep some of your local environment variables for like connecting to a database and things like that. Proxies.json, I mentioned that earlier for APIs, kind of how we used to do it, sort of. I've got a package.json because this is JavaScript. But this is actually my function here is get message. I'm going to leave most of this in here. I'm just going to change the response. I'll even leave that like name variable, like who cares? And so I'm sending a message from the future, and the message is going to be 2020 is a very bad year. So I'm sending this message back to the late 90s to not look forward to 2020. And I'm also going to go here to my function.json. Since I'm expecting that API to be called message, let me go to the next line. VS Code doesn't like what I'm trying to do here. That way it's going to kind of match that script, and that the URL is just going to look a little better too. It's not going to be called like API/get message. It's just going to look kind of ugly. This is all we have to do for the function. Let me go back down here to my terminal and so with Azure Functions too, you can run them locally to test them, which is pretty cool. You have to be in the right folder though, which I'm not, to actually be in the function app folder. There we go. Okay, and so here's my API, and it's going to be API message. So I did that right. And I'm going to command click this. So, and here we go. 2020 is a very bad year. So that's my function running locally. So we know that that works. So to deploy my function, if I'm writing functions normally in VS Code, then I use the extension, I can deploy the function app. But since this is a static web app, everything gets deployed at once. So you treat your functions as part of that static web app, even this API, and you kind of forget, like if you're used to writing Azure Functions, you kind of forget everything you know, and then you just do it this way basically. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to just push this to GitHub, and I'm going to let my GitHub action do all the work. And, we're just going to YOLO push to master. That's how we do it. I could demonstrate the pull request, like what the site looks like, but we're not going to do that. We're doing this. And then we're going to test things out. Okay. So now let's go back to GitHub. All right. So now since I did a push, this action is now running because I did a push to master. And it would run too if I did a PR, but this is what we did. So now this time it's going to take a little bit longer to run because now it's going to figure out that I have now pushed that API folder. I didn't really even look what I was pushing. I just pushed. Like, you have to be careful with your life all day at work. Isn't it nice just to present to a bunch of strangers and just be like, whatever, YOLO, git add, push, commit, push, going up to my GitHub forever. All right, so it ran that. Gonna keep going. Here we are, check out. Cannot detect the language from the repo. I feel like it should have been able to detect JavaScript in there somewhere, but that's okay. Keep going. Yeah, I didn't actually do an npm install and commit my lock file. I'm bad, but I think it'll still work. You can still be bad. See, you can be bad, and it's still like it still lets you have your site with an API. All right, so since that appears to be done, complete, yes. Let's go back to the portal here, and you can actually you can link directly to your GitHub action runs there too. Trying to see if there's anything else I should mention here. I mean, there's a lot of, you can do custom domains. There's a lot of different configurations in here too. I think I mentioned most of the things on the API. Anyway, let's go to the page and let's see if our message from the future is there. Our message from the future is not there. So I did something bad. Let's go back to my code. I'm actually I'm gonna reload it too, because sometimes I feel like it doesn't build. Let's go back to here and make sure that the function's actually deployed. All right, Zoom toolbar, you need to move again. This should not matter. All right, let's go back and look at my code. Let's try to debug live for at least some short period of time. Okay. Message. ID is message. This is the API. Let's see. Oh, no results. Oh, wait, okay. That just came up. That's interesting. So there might have been, even though that deployment passed, there might have been a little bit of a lag there. Let's go back to the overview. Do you love live demos? Get message was there. If anybody from the audience sees where I messed up, feel free to shout it out. So I've got the ID. This function looks pretty good to me. I don't see any errors. There's my response message. Zoom toolbar, man. Response message. That looks good. All right. Well, the answer is I don't know. So go back to functions.
Was it working if you hit it manually?
Yeah, it was.
But it's just not working on the site?
Yeah, that's weird.
What does DevTools say?
We're not going to go that far. I mean, I YOLO pushed everything, Kevin. I mean, which is actually, that's a good point. We should just like make sure everything got pushed. That's a good point. I'm just gonna check the easy stuff. I mean, you know, it's like after work and it's late. We're not gonna go that deep. Just mainly make sure that everything got pushed in there, and I'll fix it later and like declare victory on Twitter or something. Yeah, I mean, that all looks pretty normal to me. This looks right. Yeah, I mean, it worked locally, but it's fine. I mean, you know, it's a live demo, but so I have another static app. I'll sort of show you what it's kind of supposed to look like. If you go to my other site, well, that one doesn't work either. So that's cool. All right. Full of fail, but yeah, I will, I'll figure it out later and I will tweet everyone what sort of stupid live demo thing that I did. And it's weird. It is weird to me though, that every time I go to functions here, it like has a little bit of a delay before it has get message there. So it's sort of like it knows about it, but doesn't know about it. But anyway, we don't get our message from the future. And we'll debug later. All right.
I just loaded it in my browser. So it calls your API, but there was an error in the
in the function?
There was an error, yeah, in the console. Go back to your HTML. Go back to your JavaScript.
Oh, I knew it was gonna be here.
All right, line 52. You think it's JSON coming back. It's not JSON, it's plain text. It can't parse the JSON.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's totally it. Thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
All right. It's gonna be great. We're gonna get this demo. If anybody has questions, like put them in chat. Any questions, I'll answer anything. I will also say I don't know if I don't know. Anything about functions or static web apps or life as we know it, 2020. I think that's going to take a few minutes though to run.
Yeah, it's never fast when you want it to be fast.
Yeah, but we could watch it run while people are thinking about what sort of burning questions they want to ask me. Yeah, Azure, well, so GitHub Actions are interesting. I do like it here. The thing I'm finding with Actions is that there are certain actions that you just need to execute only on master. So I'm finding that I am doing a lot of trash commits, honestly, to test out actions. I haven't found a good method of testing. Actions are also a little bit more event driven than maybe how we used pipelines. Pipelines just was a lot more kind of linear with setting up pipelines, and just you kind of did them in order. You didn't have race conditions and things. So there's sort of the good and bad of event-driven development within GitHub Actions, but I'm getting used to it. I mean, it's pretty new. It's kind of like Azure Static Web Apps, like we're sort of still figuring it out. But things are sort of rapidly improving. About the time that I wish GitHub Actions had this feature, like it comes out with it almost, within a month. So there's a lot of development going on there.
So it looks like it's live now, but now you have a new error.
Oh, okay.
So that is the message for the future.
All right. Yeah. I mean,
it's all right. People can visualize.
Yeah. I mean, I've been on here like making a fool of myself for an hour. So are there any questions?
Yeah. Now's the time, Twitch.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they fixed this yet or not, but last time I played with it, you could only have one pull request at a time. So if you open 2 pull requests, it would error on you. It wouldn't let you create a second or third environment. I'm wondering if that's just a limitation of the preview. I'm assuming it's a limitation of the preview. So that's going to be a dumb thing to go live with.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I guess I've only used Happy Path because I haven't run into that yet.
Yeah.
Are you using Azure Static Web Apps for any like client work, Kevin, or do you kind of stay away from preview services for that?
No, actually, I had a chat with someone today. We're going to deploy their app to static apps.
Awesome.
Because the alternative is put it in blob storage and use Azure Functions. And it's like, well, what if I just use Azure Static Web Apps? It does all the same thing. And they said, yeah, that sounds great. So
I think it's cheaper. I mean, if you put it in blob storage, you're going to have to pay something.
You pay the 3 cents for, usage and storage.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, this ends up being less expensive and, you get the CI/CD. I mean, I guess one big limitation I could see for customers I've talked to is GitHub, because not everybody uses GitHub. And most people aren't that familiar with Actions. So if you wanted to kind of change the CI/CD, you have to kind of learn a little bit about Actions. So if you're totally new to this, you're learning kind of like what a static web app is, and then kind of like what is serverless and Azure Functions. And, if you're me, you're learning how to write JavaScript in an HTML file again. But yeah, I'm going to fix that after this. That's annoying.
A bunch
I
of the
I
questions.
probably did something. Oh, go ahead.
So a lot of stuff I've answered because I do a very similar talk to this. It's only JavaScript Azure Functions at the moment. And I learned that one the hard way.
It's coming soon. It's coming soon, though. That's like the next thing. I mean, Microsoft isn't going to like not have .NET functions available. So
I don't know. What else? There was some other like dumb little thing I noticed. It has come leaps and bounds. I remember the first one I built, I had a Gridsome site. I was playing with Gridsome and Gatsby, and you couldn't just push it. You had to really you had to basically take the workflow file, and you had to rewrite half of it custom. They fixed that, thankfully. Now they have the new wizard where you can say, oh, this is a Gatsby site.
These are a lot of these are new too. Like Jekyll wasn't there, ViewPress wasn't there. I think it was just Gatsby and like Next in the very beginning. I'm looking at the docs to see if there's anything we can talk about here. I mean, the docs are just really, really good for this, honestly. I mean, there's a lot of how-to guides. There's a Learn course too. The Microsoft Learn, all the Learn stuff is good. I mean, we use it internally. Like if I'm even doing a certification or something, I do Learn. I was building a Power App. I went through all the Learn modules. That's pretty good. I think that this is sort of based on some of the John Papa stuff that he's put out. There's some tutorials here, the quick starts. It also has like the 3 ways that you can do it if you want to like go all the, Studio Code or Portal or CLI. I do a mixture of all 3. It just depends on what I'm doing. Some of the concepts, we kind of went through like most of this. Yeah, the review pull requests is what we were talking about there. Not supporting multiple pull requests. That's interesting.
Oh, custom domains only support subdomains, doesn't support naked domains.
Right.
Yeah. Unless they fix that. Wait.
No, they didn't.
They didn't? Okay.
No, because I ran into that with mullet.run.
Yeah.
Man, we're just
and there
like,
was something with SSL
poo-pooing
too,
all
wasn't
over
it?
this now.
Like they don't support SSL with custom domains.
Yeah.
There was something silly. Yeah.
Let's see if it actually says here what it doesn't do. No. Yeah, I mean, you can add all of the same environment variables, like, app configurations in this too, that you would if you were, doing anything in app service or with Azure Functions. So that's pretty cool. I think when this came out, I think I personally thought it's about time. Getting ready to get on the soapbox here, but I feel like cloud in general is just very focused on backend developers. And sort of front-end developers just don't quite know what to do with cloud and cloud services a lot of the times, because they spend a lot of time kind of more in like a creative space, I feel like, and like writing code, obviously, and solving bigger problems that I solve, like if I'm writing an API. But when it comes to kind of deploying things, there's not really great services to support front-end apps. And so I think this is good. I think AWS kind of beat Azure out of the gate to some extent, but I think this is a good tool, and I think that they kind of used what was good and bad in other tools, and I think it's evolving, and there's a lot of feedback from the community. I don't know if we were recording, we were talking about this, but I feel like the Azure developer advocates that are much more focused on community and students, they've really taken a hold of this and put out some good content. And there was a Create Front End conference. There was a Microsoft conference, and there was a lot of good talks, kind of like, not recorded, off the cuff kind of talks about Azure Static Web Apps and some other, sort of front end topics. So yeah, it's cool. It's great that cloud is now understanding that there are developers who, write front end apps. They also need to deploy things, and they have a lot of the same considerations as developers writing APIs. Like a front end developer still needs some sort of CI/CD process and still understands DevOps. And so, yeah, it's about time we kind of supported that. Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned before too that this doesn't quite support Azure Functions as we know it. Like if you're used to writing Azure Functions, this is a little bit weird. Like it changes your muscle memory to deploy it as part of the static web app, and to kind of have routes that seem almost like old fashioned if you're used to using API management. But yeah, I think it kind of simplifies a lot of stuff though too. The end. Getting off my soapbox.
All right. Well, chat is very quiet. So
everyone is tired.
Yeah, everyone's tired
all day.
Well, Linda, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
All right.
And dropping some knowledge.
I'm going to fix my app and declare victory later.
Let's see. So next month we have Chad, isn't it? Yep. Chad Green is going to talk about change tracking in Cosmos DB. That's actually I think that's the first Cosmos talk we've had in over a year. No one's really excited about
there's
Cosmos
a consumption plan for Cosmos coming out at some point. They were teasing it at Build.
Oh, that'd be nice. So the one reason I refuse to use Cosmos is because I accidentally coded myself into a $1,300 bill, and I'm not sure how. I literally don't know how it happened. because you never find out the bill till like 2 months later. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, oh well. So much about that. Cool. Well, all right. Well, we'll go ahead and cut it off here. Thank you everyone for hanging out with us. Thank you, Linda.
Yep.
Thank you, Drew, for hanging out. Drew, how's your mini computer coming?
I haven't really made much progress. Yeah.
I've asked you like past 3 months how it's doing, and it's the same thing. No progress. You need.
No.
I
We
mean,
need some
aren't you at
progress.
home? Don't you have just like so much more extra time now? That's what everybody
Yeah,
thinks.
I've got a dozen other projects going on at the same time.
Well, good times. All right, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you all next month.
All right. Thanks, guys.
And